February 23, 1943, Telefunken Headquarters, Berlin. The magnifying glass trembled slightly in Oberst Runge's hand as he examined the copper block salvaged from the wreckage 3 weeks earlier. "This cannot be real," he wrote in his classified technical report. "No nation could achieve such miniaturization while simultaneously producing such power output." Through the laboratory windows, he could see the smoke rising from the bombed factories across the city, tangible evidence of Allied air superiority. Yet here, on his workbench, lay physical proof that the technological gap was worse than anyone in the German High Command had dared to admit. The device before him, retrieved from a downed British Sterling bomber near Rotterdam on the night of February 2nd, measured barely 10 centimeters across. This cavity magnetron, as the British called it, generated microwave radar frequencies that rendered every German countermeasure obsolete. It was elegant in its simplicity, devastating in its implications, and utterly beyond anything German science had achieved. What neither Runge nor his colleagues yet understood was that this single copper block would explain a mystery that had been costing Grand Admiral Karl Donitz 40 submarines per month, a hemorrhaging of men and machines that threatened to lose Germany the Battle of the Atlantic within weeks. The mathematical certainty of German defeat was being written not in naval strategy, but in electromagnetic wavelengths that German radar detectors could not see. The psychological transformation had begun. On that freezing February morning in Rotterdam, Dutch resistance members had watched German soldiers cordoning off the crash site with unusual urgency. The Sterling bomber, serial number R9264 from 7 Squadron RAF, had been returning from only its second operational mission when flak had torn through its port wing. The crew of 7 had died instantly in the crash, but their sacrifice would prove more valuable to the Allied cause than they could have imagined. The aircraft carried Britain's newest secret weapon, the H-2S ground mapping radar system, designed to allow bombers to navigate and identify targets through cloud cover and darkness. At its heart lay the cavity magnetron, a device so revolutionary that Winston Churchill himself had agonized over its deployment, fearing exactly what had now occurred. The bomber had been part of a raid on Cologne following H-2S radar's combat debut against Hamburg just 3 days earlier on January 30, 1943. General de Luftwaffe Wolfgang Martini, chief of Luftwaffe Signals Intelligence and one of Germany's most senior radar experts, was alerted to the crash within hours. As the officer responsible for all German radar development and signals intelligence, Martini understood immediately that the Rotterdam crash might provide answers to questions that had been haunting German commanders for months. His position as head of the Luftwaffe's entire communications and radar infrastructure made him uniquely qualified to assess whatever technology the British bomber might contain. Martini dispatched his most experienced technical teams to the crash site. Their initial reconnaissance confirmed his worst fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. The bomber's belly contained equipment unlike anything German forces had encountered. The rotating antenna assembly, the cathode ray display system, the sophisticated power supply, all pointed to advanced radar technology operating on principles that German engineers had theoretically discussed but dismissed as impractical for operational deployment. But when his technicians carefully extracted the transmitter assembly from the wreckage, examining the component that powered this mysterious system, what they found defied German understanding of physics and engineering. The magnetron itself, British model CV-64, consisted of a solid copper cylinder approximately 8 centimeters in diameter and 12 centimeters long. 8 cylindrical cavities had been precision machined into the copper, arranged symmetrically around a central cathode. The entire assembly was surrounded by powerful permanent magnets. It was deceptively simple in appearance, yet initial field tests suggested it generated enormous microwave power at frequencies German equipment could neither produce nor detect reliably. Martini ordered the device transported immediately to Berlin under armed guard. He had seen enough to know this discovery might explain why Donitz's U-boats were dying at unprecedented rates. The British had achieved something German science had declared impossible: a compact, powerful microwave radar system that could be mounted in aircraft and ships, providing detection capabilities against which Germany had no defenses and no countermeasures. The journey from mystery to revelation had actually begun months earlier in the gray waters of the North Atlantic. Throughout late 1942 and early 1943, U-boat commanders had been reporting increasingly disturbing encounters with Allied aircraft that seemed to possess supernatural detection abilities. Kapitän Leutnant Hans Joachim Schwanke, commanding U-43, had filed a report in December 1942 that typified the growing crisis. His boat had been transiting the Bay of Bisque on a moonless night, running on the surface to recharge batteries, when searchlights had suddenly blazed from directly overhead. There had been no warning from the MTOX radar detector, no engine noise, nothing to indicate an aircraft's approach. Depth charges had bracketed his diving boat, causing severe damage that forced an emergency return to port. "We were blind," Schwanke wrote in his war diary. "The MTOX gave no alarm. The aircraft appeared as if materialized from darkness itself. Only luck saved us. We heard the bombs falling and crash-dived with seconds to spare. Our detectors should have warned us minutes in advance, giving us time to dive safely. Instead, we had no warning at all. Either the British have developed radar our detectors cannot sense, or they are using some other technology we do not understand. Whatever the explanation, we are being hunted by enemies we cannot detect until the moment of attack." Similar reports flooded into U-boat headquarters in Paris throughout the winter. Boats were being caught on the surface at night with no warning. Aircraft seemed to see through darkness and weather that should have provided cover. The MTOX radar detectors, which had given U-boats advance warning of aircraft equipped with older ASV Mark II radar systems operating at 1.5-meter wavelengths, had become worse than useless because commanders still trusted them to provide adequate warning. The statistics told a grim story that would become catastrophic by spring. In November 1942, German U-boats sank approximately 119 merchant ships, totaling 729,000 tons worldwide, losing 13 submarines in return. December saw 60 merchant ships totaling 330,000 tons sunk, with 5 U-boat lost. By January 1943, sinkings dropped to 37 ships, while U-boat losses climbed to 7. The exchange rate, once heavily in Germany's favor, was collapsing at an accelerating pace. Admiral Karl Donitz, promoted to Commander-in-Chief of the entire Kriegsmarine on January 30, 1943, while retaining direct control of U-boat operations through his subordinate staff, watched these numbers with growing alarm. His headquarters maintained detailed plots of every U-boat position, every convoy route, every engagement. The patterns emerging from these plots made no sense according to conventional naval warfare logic. U-boat approaching convoys in darkness were being intercepted before they could attack. Boats transiting the Bay of Bisque under cover of night were being bombed with precise accuracy. Submarines running submerged during daylight were somehow being tracked and depth-charged. Allied aircraft appeared to possess supernatural ability to locate submarines in conditions where visual detection should be impossible. The weather conditions during many attacks ruled out visual detection entirely. Yet the attacks came with devastating precision. Corvette and Captain Gea Hessler-Donitz's son-in-law, who had married his daughter Ursula in November 1937, served as first staff officer at U-boat headquarters. Hessler spent weeks analyzing combat reports, seeking explanation for the mysterious losses. The pattern was clear but incomprehensible. Allied detection capabilities had improved dramatically over a very short period, between late 1942 and early 1943, suggesting new technology rather than improved tactics or training. But what technology could see through darkness, clouds, and fog? What could detect a submarine's small conning tower from miles away? What could track a periscope wake or snorkel exhaust in conditions where human observers would be completely blind? The questions multiplied faster than answers could be found. Donitz convened crisis meetings with Germany's top scientists and engineers throughout January and February 1943. The discussions revealed disturbing ignorance about Allied capabilities and troubling complacency about German technological superiority. German radar experts insisted that no radar system could effectively operate at wavelengths shorter than about 50 centimeters due to fundamental power generation limitations. The vacuum tube technology available, they argued, simply could not generate sufficient power at higher frequencies to make shorter wavelength radar practical for military applications. The MTOX detectors designed to detect Allied radar operating at 1.5-meter wavelength should theoretically warn of any radar-equipped aircraft. The system worked by detecting the electromagnetic emissions from Allied radar, giving U-boats several minutes warning to crash dive before the aircraft could close to attack range. Yet clearly they were not providing adequate warning anymore. Something had changed in Allied capabilities. But what? Some scientists speculated that the Allies had developed infrared detection systems that could sense engine heat from U-boat diesel exhaust. Others suggested acoustic detection, though this seemed implausible at the operational distances involved. A few voices mentioned the theoretical possibility of centimetric radar using advanced magnetron technology, but this was dismissed as impractical. Germany's own research into such systems had concluded they offered no tactical advantage worth the enormous development investment required. The British could not possibly have solved problems that had defeated German engineering, the experts assured Donitz. German science was the best in the world. If German engineers had concluded centimetric radar was impractical, then it must be impractical. The Allies must be using some other approach, perhaps multiple detection methods working in combination. The idea that Britain, suffering under strategic bombing, with its industrial base under constant attack, could have developed revolutionary radar technology superior to anything Germany possessed, seemed absurd to many experts. This complacent certainty would shatter completely when Runge's team at Telefunken began examining the Rotterdam device. The magnetron arrived in Berlin on February 5, 1943, accompanied by photographs of the complete H2S installation and detailed reports from the crash site. Runge assembled Germany's top microwave specialists for what would become known as the Rotterdam Working Group, or Arbeidsgemeinschaft Rotterdam. Their task was to determine exactly what the device was, how it worked, and critically, what capabilities it provided the Allies. The first meeting of this working group would occur on February 22nd or 23rd at Telefunken's Berlin offices. The initial examination on February 6th revealed the magnetron's basic operating principle. Within hours, the cylindrical cavities acted as resonant chambers, generating and amplifying electromagnetic oscillations as electrons spiraled through the magnetic field created by the permanent magnets. It was conceptually similar to earlier splitter-node magnetron designs that German engineers had experimented with in the 1930s, but executed with a level of engineering sophistication that shocked the German team. Dr. Otto Hockenberg, a young physicist assigned to document the examination, would later recall the moment of realization in interviews conducted after the war. When we first energized the magnetron using laboratory power supplies, the frequency counter registered 3.3 gigahertz, a frequency we could barely measure, let alone generate with any power. The output meter showed 40 kilowatts of peak power. It was like discovering the enemy possessed artillery when you thought the battlefield limited to rifles. We understood immediately why the MTOX was useless. It was built to detect meter-wavelength radar operating around 1.5 meters or 200 megahertz. This device operated at 9.1 centimeter wavelength, more than 16 times shorter. Our detectors were completely deaf and blind to this radiation. The electromagnetic spectrum the British were exploiting was entirely outside the range our warning receivers could detect. We had been fighting blind, unaware that the enemy could see us clearly while we saw nothing. Runge's team worked around the clock for 2 weeks, reverse engineering the complete H2S system from the wreckage and the recovered components. The magnetron powered a rotating antenna that scanned a 360-degree arc beneath the aircraft. Returns appeared on a plan position indicator cathode ray display, creating a map-like image showing coastlines, cities, rivers, and terrain features with remarkable clarity. For the first time, bomber crews could navigate and identify targets in complete darkness or through solid cloud cover. The system had been designed primarily for strategic bombing navigation, allowing Pathfinder aircraft to mark targets for following bomber streams regardless of weather conditions. British bombers could now attack Germany in weather that had previously provided natural protection. But the implications for submarine warfare were even more profound than the bombing applications. The same cavity magnetron technology adapted for air-to-surface search radar, designated ASV Mark III, could detect a submarine's conning tower from 20 miles away, in any weather, day or night. The small radar cross-section that had previously protected submarines from detection meant nothing against this sensitive high-frequency system operating in the centimetric wavelength band. Worse yet, the microwave emissions were completely undetectable by German radar warning receivers. All existing German detection equipment, including the MTOX system that U-boat relied upon, operated in the meter wavelength range. The MTOX could detect radar operating between 1.3 and 2.6 meter wavelength, covering the frequency range of ASV Mark II radar that had equipped Allied aircraft through 1942. But this new centimetric radar operated at 9.1 centimeters, a frequency 17 times higher than anything German warning receivers could detect. U-boat were running blind into enemy attacks, their defensive systems obsolete without their knowledge. The technological surprise was complete and devastating. On February 23, 1943, The Rotterdam Working Group presented their findings to German military and industrial leadership. While no documentary evidence confirms the personal attendance of either Reich Marshal Hermann Göring or Admiral Dönitz at this technical working group meeting, both were certainly briefed on the findings. Representatives from every major German electronics firm attended, including engineers from Telefunken, Siemens, AEG, and Lorenz. Senior Luftwaffe signals officers and marine technical specialists filled the conference room at Telefunken headquarters. The mood was somber. Runge began his presentation with a statement that would be recorded in the minutes and later recovered by Allied investigators after the war. We must report with complete frankness that the British have achieved a technological breakthrough of extraordinary significance. The cavity magnetron represents an advance in microwave generation that exceeds German capabilities by at least 3 years of normal development. More critically for current operations, the device enables radar detection systems against which we have no countermeasures and no defenses. The presentation detailed the technical specifications of the CV-64 magnetron. 8 resonant cavities machined into a copper block operating at 3.3 GHz frequency with 9.1 centimeter wavelength. Peak power output of 40 kilowatts. Compact construction suitable for aircraft installation. Robust design capable of withstanding combat conditions. Production quality indicating established manufacturing processes rather than experimental prototypes. The implications were devastating. If the British could manufacture these devices in quantity, and the production quality suggested they could, then every Allied aircraft and ship could be potentially equipped with radar systems against which Germany had no defense. The MTOX warning receivers were useless. The extensive network of German radar installations operating in the meter wavelength range would be increasingly obsolete. German night fighters, German anti-aircraft defenses, German naval vessels all relied on radar technology that the British had leapfrogged by an entire generation. When Göring was briefed through his staff channels, possibly at the Humbeltine Flak Tower in Berlin, where the reassembled H-2S system was demonstrated, his reaction was reportedly of considerable consternation. The Reichsmarschall, who had boasted in 1939 that no enemy aircraft would ever bomb Germany, now faced evidence that British bombers could navigate and bomb in any weather conditions, using technology Germany could not match. Dönitz, when briefed through his staff channels, understood the implications more clearly than anyone else in the German high command. His U-boat force had lost 39 submarines in the first 2 months of 1943, 17 in January and February combined, though records show 7 in January and 17 in February for a total of 24, with additional boats lost in December, bringing recent losses to 39 over the 3-month period. If this trend continued, the U-boat campaign would collapse within months. Captain Tazur Eberhard Gott, who served as Dönitz's operations chief and had been promoted to Contra-Admiral in March 1943, maintained detailed statistical analyses of U-boat operations. The numbers told an increasingly grim story. In the first quarter of 1943, German U-boats were being lost faster than they could be replaced, despite shipyard production running at approximately 20 to 24 boats per month. More critically, experienced crews were dying faster than training programs could replace them. The meeting attendees reached several sobering conclusions that were documented in classified reports later captured by Allied forces. First, Germany could not replicate the cavity magnetron in operationally significant numbers before 1944 at the earliest. The precision machining required to create the resonant cavities, the specialized copper alloys, the powerful permanent magnets using cobalt that Germany lacked in sufficient quantities, and the manufacturing expertise required were all beyond immediate German capabilities. Even a crash program would take months to establish production lines. Second, developing effective countermeasures would require at minimum 6 months. A new generation of radar warning receivers tuned to centimetric frequencies could theoretically be designed, but production and installation across the entire U-boat fleet would extend well into 1944. The technical challenges of building receivers that could detect 3.3 gigahertz emissions were formidable given Germany's limited experience with microwave technology. Third, and most devastating, the British almost certainly had variants of this technology beyond what was captured. The Rotterdam device operated at 9.1 centimeters. Allied scientists likely had already developed or were actively developing 3-centimeter systems that would render even new German countermeasures obsolete before they were deployed. The technological race was not merely lost, it was unwinnable in the war's current timeframe given the Allied head start and superior industrial capacity. Dönitz absorbed these briefings with growing understanding of the catastrophe facing his command. His U-boat headquarters, which had relocated to the Paris area in March 1942 after the Saint Lazaire commando raid exposed the vulnerability of the previous Laurent location, maintained detailed plots of every engagement, every loss, every tactical development. The maps on the operations room walls told the story more clearly than any statistical analysis. Red pins marking U-boat positions had thinned dramatically across the North Atlantic. Blue pins indicating Allied convoys seemed to flow through areas where wolf packs should have intercepted them. Black pins, the markers of U-boat losses, clustered along transit routes through the Bay of Biscay and in operational areas where boats encountered Allied air patrols. "We have been fighting blind," Dönitz told his senior staff in briefings following the Rotterdam device examination. "Every advantage we believed we possessed has been neutralized by Allied technology we did not know existed." Surprise attack at night meant nothing when the enemy could see in complete darkness. The vast expanse of the Atlantic provided no concealment when radar could detect a conning tower from 20 meters away. Our radar warning systems gave us false confidence while providing no actual protection against this new threat. The question facing Dönitz was stark: what could be done? While German industry scrambled to develop countermeasures that might not arrive until 1944, Hessler proposed several tactical adaptations. All U-boat commanders would be informed that radar warning systems were unreliable and should not be trusted to provide adequate warning of air attack. Boats would be ordered to remain submerged as much as possible, surfacing only when absolutely necessary to recharge batteries or transit at higher speed. Anti-aircraft armament would be increased on all boats, though this was recognized as a desperate measure against aircraft that could detect U-boats long before the boats could see the aircraft. Most critically, Dönitz and his staff began preparing for the possibility that the U-boat campaign in the Atlantic might become unsustainable. If losses continued at current rates while Allied shipbuilding capacity continued expanding, the strategic mathematics would become impossible. Germany would be losing the war of tonnage, unable to sink merchant ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. March 1943 proved both the apex and the beginning of the end for Dönitz's U-boat force. The largest convoy battles of the war were fought that month, with massive wolf packs of 30 to 40 boats attempting to overwhelm convoy defenses through sheer numbers. For a brief moment, it seemed the strategy might work despite the growing Allied technological advantage. Convoys HX-229 and SC-122, sailing together through the North Atlantic in mid-March 1943, were attacked by approximately 40 U-boats from 3 wolf packs. The battle raged from March 16th to 20th, 1943. 21 merchant ships totaling 141,000 tons were sunk, the highest losses from any single convoy battle of the war. The British Admiralty issued an internal assessment that Germany had never come closer to severing Britain's Atlantic lifeline. But the cost to Germany was unsustainable. The U-boats attacking these convoys lost one boat definitively, U-384, with several others damaged. However, the broader March statistics showed 12 to 15 U-boats lost during the month, depending on classification methodology, with many losses occurring in areas outside the major convoy battles. The mathematics were inescapable. Even when achieving tactical success in sinking merchant ships, the strategic picture was deteriorating. Allied shipyards, particularly the rapidly expanding American construction program, were producing merchant vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. The Liberty ship program had reduced construction time from over 200 days in 1941 to an average of 42 days by 1944. While individual ships like the SS Robert E. Peary were built in record time, 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes in November 1942, these were propaganda achievements rather than standard production rates. Nevertheless, American yards were launching approximately 3 Liberty ships every 2 days at peak production, a rate of roughly 1.5 ships daily. German U-boats sinking an average of 3,000 to 5,000 tons per boat before being destroyed could not match this production rate. As long as Allied shipyards could replace losses faster than U-boat could inflict them, the campaign represented strategic defeat disguised as tactical success. The only way to win the tonnage war was to maintain an unsustainable exchange ratio, while simultaneously avoiding losses that Germany could not replace. The true catastrophe came in May 1943, the month that would become known among U-boat crews as Black May. Throughout the month, Allied aircraft and surface escorts equipped with centimetric ASV Mark III radar and Type 271 shipboard radar savaged the U-boat force with unprecedented effectiveness. The convoy battle for ONS-5 in late April and early May marked the turning point. This slow convoy of 43 merchantmen protected by 16 escorts was attacked by approximately 30 U-boat. The Germans managed to sink 12 to 13 merchant ships, but lost 6 to 7 U-boat, with an additional 5 to 7 severely damaged. For the first time in a major convoy battle, the U-boat suffered losses approaching their successes. The exchange ratio had become unsustainable. 2 weeks later, convoy SC-130 demonstrated complete Allied dominance. Of 37 to 38 merchant ships in convoy, 0 were lost, despite attacks by 25 to 33 U-boat from 3 patrol lines. The German forces lost 3 to 5 U-boat, including U-954. The decisive Allied victory represented the last seriously threatened convoy of 1943. Throughout May, the losses mounted relentlessly. On May 4th, U-209 was sunk in the North Atlantic with all 46 crew lost. On May 5th, U-447 and U-663 were both destroyed. May 6th saw U-465 and U-563 sunk. May 11th brought the losses of U-89, U-86, and U-456. May 12th saw U-528 depth-charged with all hands lost. May 15th brought the destruction of U-176. May 19th saw the loss of U-273 and U-954. The loss of U-954 on May 19, 1943, carried particular personal weight for Admiral Dönitz. The Type 7C U-boat commanded by Captain Lieutenant Odo Lowe carried among its crew Lieutenant Sir Peter Dönitz, the Admiral's youngest son, serving as watch officer. The boat was attacking convoy SC-130 when it was detected by the River-class frigate HMS Jed and the Calendar B-class slope HMS Sennen. The British escorts prosecuted the contact with Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars and depth charges. The Hedgehog weapon, introduced in 1942, represented a significant advance over conventional depth charges. Rather than exploding at preset depths regardless of whether they hit the target, Hedgehog projectiles exploded only on contact. This meant that when explosions occurred, they confirmed a hit rather than simply disturbing the water and making sonar tracking difficult. U-954 was destroyed with all 47 crew members killed at coordinates 54.54 north, 34.19 west. The loss was reported to Dönitz by secure telegraph. U-954 attacked and sunk by British escorts HMS Jed and Sennen. Hedgehog weapons achieved direct hit, no survivors, your son is gone. Dönitz did not pause operations or take leave. There would be time for grief after the war if Germany survived. For now, his duty was to the approximately 40,000 submariners under his command, the living who still depended on his decisions. The personal loss, devastating as it was, could not be allowed to interfere with operational responsibilities at this critical moment when the entire U-boat campaign faced potential collapse. By May 22, 1943, the operational U-boat force had lost between 41 and 43 boats during the month, depending on classification methodology. U-boat.net lists 42 boats lost, with 10,065 men killed and 1,837 survivors. Other sources cite 41 combat losses, or 43 including boats stricken from operational roles. Regardless of the exact figure, the losses represented approximately 25% of operational U-boat strength, making the month catastrophically unsustainable for German naval operations. Dönitz called his operations staff into emergency session on May 24, 1943. The plot board showed a catastrophe unprecedented in U-boat operations. A quarter of the operational force destroyed in 3 weeks. Casualty rates exceeding any previous period. Experienced commanders dying faster than training schools could replace them. New generations of officers, the men who would have led the force in 1944 and 1945, were drowning in the Atlantic at 23 and 24 years old, their potential forever lost. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz made the most painful decision of his career. He drafted the order that effectively conceded defeat in the Battle of the Atlantic. To all U-boat at sea, due to superiority of enemy location equipment and overwhelming air coverage, North Atlantic operations are temporarily suspended, effective immediately. All boats currently in the North Atlantic are to withdraw to positions southwest of the Azores. Boats transiting to operational areas are to proceed to Biscay ports. Further operations will await development of improved detection equipment and enhanced anti-aircraft capabilities. We have not surrendered. We have recognized reality. The immediate statistical impact was dramatic. In June 1943, only 17 merchant ships were sunk in the Atlantic. In July, only 9. The Allied supply line, which had seemed on the verge of being severed in March, became secure. The vast convoys that would support D-Day and the liberation of Europe began assembling in American ports, protected by technology that had rendered Germany's most effective weapon obsolete. But the human toll on the U-boat force continued throughout the remaining years of the war. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in U-boat during the war, Approximately 30,000 would die, representing a 75% casualty rate, the highest of any military service on either side. They drowned in steel cylinders crushed by depth charges. They suffocated when air systems failed under prolonged depth charge attack. They burned when diesel fuel ignited from combat damage. They froze in the North Atlantic or cooked in tropical waters when boats were forced to remain submerged for extended periods. They died knowing their equipment was inferior, their missions increasingly futile, their sacrifice changing nothing in the war's strategic outcome. Yet they continued fighting because duty demanded it, and because abandoning the struggle would free Allied air and naval forces for other theaters, hastening defeat on all fronts. The interrogation reports from captured crews during summer and fall of 1943 revealed the profound psychological impact of technological inferiority. Allied intelligence officers, initially confused by the defeatism among prisoners who had been fanatical believers in German victory just months earlier, gradually recognized they were witnessing a unique phenomenon. These men had not been defeated in conventional battle. They had been rendered obsolete by science, hunted by technology they could neither see nor counter. Kapitan Leutnant Vera Henker, commanding U-515, achieved considerable success during his command, sinking multiple merchant ships and earning the Knight's Cross. However, his boat was sunk on April 9, 1944, by U.S. Task Group 22.3, consisting of the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and destroyer escorts. Approximately 40 crew members were captured, including Henker. During interrogation at Fort Hunt, Virginia, officially designated P.O. Box 1142, Henke provided detailed testimony that was classified until 1985. The interrogation transcripts, declassified decades later, revealed the profound demoralization caused by the Allied radar advantage and provide valuable historical insight into German understanding of their technological disadvantage. "We knew by mid-1943 that the war was lost," Henker told his interrogators during sessions conducted between May 3 and June 15, 1944. Not because German soldiers lacked courage or skill, but because Allied technology was systematically destroying every advantage we once possessed. The MTOX detector became useless against the new radar. We called it the grave bell among crews, because when it failed to warn of approaching aircraft, it rang only for our funerals. Later models that could detect centimetric radar arrived too late for most boats. The MTOX system, introduced in September 1943, could theoretically detect the new radar, but even when it worked, we could only detect emissions at short range, while Allied aircraft detected us from beyond visual distance. We could dive when warned, but aircraft would circle overhead, calling destroyers to depth charge us. We could not escape what we could not see until it was too late. Henker's interrogation took a dark turn when he was falsely accused of war crimes related to survivors of the SS Ceramic, a liner sunk by U-515 in December 1942. Threatened with extradition to Britain to face charges, Henker became increasingly desperate. On June 15, 1944, he attempted to escape by climbing the perimeter fence at Fort Hunt. He was shot and killed by guards, becoming the only prisoner to attempt to escape from the facility during World War II. Oberleutnant Tussi Herbert Wehrer survived the war after serving on 5 different U-boats, including surviving the sinking of U-612 in August 1942 and U-414 in July 1944. His post-war memoir, Iron Coffins, a personal account of the German U-boat battles of World War II, first published in 1969, became one of the most widely read and respected accounts of the U-boat war from the German perspective. Werer described the psychological impact of fighting against superior Allied technology. Every patrol after May 1943 was a survival exercise disguised as a military operation. We understood that Allied radar could detect our periscope wake, our snorkel exhaust, even our conning tower when awash. We traveled submerged far longer than boats were designed to endure, breathing foul air, conserving battery power, surfacing only when fuel and oxygen forced us. The Atlantic, which we had dominated in 1942, became an enemy more dangerous than British destroyers. It hid Allied aircraft above fog and Allied ships beyond horizons, while revealing our every movement to enemies equipped with technology that gave us complete tactical advantage. We were being hunted by forces we could not detect until the moment of attack. Korvettant Kapitan Peter Erich Kramer, who commanded U-333 through multiple successful patrols, survived the war as one of only 3 senior U-boat commanders to do so. His memoirs, published as U-Boat Commander, A Periscope View of the Battle of the Atlantic by the Naval Institute Press in 1984, provided another valuable perspective on the technological revolution that defeated the U-boat force. Kramer recalled a patrol in June 1943, shortly after the withdrawal from the North Atlantic. We were ordered to patrol off the African coast, seeking isolated targets away from heavy air coverage. Even there, Allied aircraft appeared with impossible frequency, given the vast ocean areas involved. One afternoon, we detected an enemy aircraft at extreme range with our new Wanza radar warning receiver. I ordered immediate dive to 150 meters and rigged for silent running. We stayed down 6 hours, far beyond safe operational limits. When we carefully surfaced to snorkel, the same aircraft or another reappeared within minutes, forcing us down again. This pattern continued for 14 hours until our batteries were nearly exhausted. We had to surface or suffocate. When we broached, the aircraft was waiting, positioned perfectly for attack. Designed to serve as a platform for mid-war midnight to coordinate the fighter under it, all these countermeasures were undertaken under the barrage of Allied bombings, which targeted German industrial centers. The Battle of the Atlantic had turned decisively against Germany. We lost 3 U-boats to convoy in June 1943 alone, and this loss would only accelerate. Only frantic anti-aircraft fire and a crash dive that nearly imploded the pressure hull saved us. We never fired a torpedo that patrol. We spent 3 weeks attempting to evade detection long enough to attack anything. Allied mastery of the technological domain was so complete we barely executed our basic mission. The technical investigations continued through 1943 and 1944 as German engineers desperately attempted to develop countermeasures. They produced the LMS-10 magnetron, a direct copy of the British CV-64 design with at least 4 units delivered by May 1943. However, production was severely constrained by material shortages, particularly the cobalt required for permanent magnets. Most of the early units required magnets salvaged from other captured aircraft, making large-scale production impossible. Telefunken began developing an indigenous German magnetron, designated LMS-12, attempting to adapt the British design to materials available in Germany. But this development would not reach even limited production until April 1944, far too late to affect the war's outcome. By that point, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively lost for nearly a year. Actual production of German cavity magnetrons totaled several hundred units across all variants by war's end, with estimates suggesting fewer than 1,000 total units produced. This contrasted starkly with Allied production, which numbered in the tens of thousands. While exact production figures for 1943 remain unclear, The disparity in industrial capacity and available materials meant Germany could never hope to match Allied production rates. Radar warning receivers that could detect centimetric frequencies were developed in parallel efforts. The Naxos system, designated FUG-350 Naxos Z for aircraft and FMBB-7 Naxos U for U-boat, was introduced in September 1943. The system could theoretically warn U-boat of approaching aircraft equipped with ASV Mark III radar, operating at 9.1 centimeter wavelength. However, by the time Naxos entered operational service, Allied scientists had already developed 3 centimeter radar systems against which Naxos was blind. The H-2X radar used by American forces and the Alvar advanced versions of H-2S operated at 3 centimeter wavelength, requiring entirely new detection equipment. The Germans were perpetually one generation behind, forever attempting to counter yesterday's threats while new systems rendered their countermeasures obsolete before they could be widely deployed. A Junkers Ju-88 night fighter equipped with Naxos radar warning equipment did land at an RAF airfield, though not in November 1943, as sometimes reported. On July 13, 1944, a Ju-88G-1 landed at RAF Woodbridge carrying Fuji 350 Naxos Z, Fensburg homing equipment, and Liechtenstein SN-2 radar. The crew had become disoriented and believed they were landing at a German base. British technical intelligence immediately examined the equipment, gaining valuable insight into German countermeasure capabilities. The examination revealed that while German engineering was sophisticated and the Naxos system worked as designed, it remained fundamentally defensive. It could warn of Allied radar emissions, but provided no offensive capability. More critically, it could only detect the 9.1 centimeter emissions of first-generation Allied centimetric radar, not the newer 3 centimeter systems already entering service. The German Navy also attempted tactical adaptations to cope with Allied radar superiority. U-boat were fitted with additional anti-aircraft guns, with some boats designated as flank boats, carrying quad 20mm mounts and heavy AA armament. The theory was that if boats could not hide from radar-equipped aircraft, they should remain surfaced and fight it out with anti-aircraft fire. This proved disastrous in practice. Allied aircraft could detect U-boat from ranges far exceeding effective anti-aircraft fire. Aircraft could approach from any direction, often attacking from the sun or cloud cover, giving the U-boat crew only seconds to man and engage. The aircraft's speed advantage meant it could choose when and how to attack, while the stationary U-boat simply waited to be attacked. Flak boat programs cost more submarines than it destroyed aircraft, representing another failed attempt to counter Allied technological advantage through tactics alone. Acoustic homing torpedoes, named Zankenig, and designated G7ES or T5, were introduced in September 1943 as a countermeasure against convoy escorts. The first 80 torpedoes were delivered August 1, 1943, with large-scale use beginning against convoys ONS-18 and ONS-22 in late September. These torpedoes could home in on the propeller noise of escort vessels, theoretically allowing U-boat to sink the escorts before attacking the merchant ships. Initial results were promising, with several escorts damaged or sunk. However, the Allies quickly developed countermeasures, including the Foxer noisemaker towed behind ships to decoy the acoustic torpedoes. More fundamentally, acoustic torpedoes could not compensate for the German inability to locate convoys in the first place. If Allied radar detected U-boat before they could approach convoys, acoustic torpedoes provided no advantage. New submarine designs incorporating snorkel systems represented another attempt to adapt to Allied technological superiority. The snorkel, originally a Dutch invention from 1938, captured when Germany overran the Netherlands in 1940, was initially ignored. German engineers began testing snorkel systems on U-58 in summer 1943, with operational use beginning in early 1944. The snorkel allowed U-boat to run diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth, recharging batteries and transiting without surfacing. This reduced vulnerability to radar-equipped aircraft. However, snorkels were far from perfect solutions. They left a wake visible to radar, particularly in calm seas. They limited speed to a few knots. They required excellent seamanship in rough weather, as waves washing over the snorkel head would trigger automatic valves that momentarily cut air supply, creating uncomfortable and dangerous pressure fluctuations inside the boat. By mid-1944, approximately 50% of U-boat operating from French bases were equipped with snorkels. While this improved survival rates somewhat, it could not reverse the fundamental strategic defeat. U-boat equipped with snorkels could evade some attacks, but they could not sink enough merchant ships to affect Allied logistics. The Battle of the Atlantic had already been decisively lost. The revolutionary Type 21 electro boat represented Germany's most ambitious attempt to regain technological parity. This radical design featured streamlined hull form, triple battery capacity, 17.2 knots submerged speed compared to 7.6 knots for conventional Type 7 boats, 6 bow torpedo tubes with hydraulic reload capability, allowing 18 torpedoes to be fired in under 20 minutes, and sophisticated sonar systems. The Type 21 theoretically could outrun most surface escorts while submerged and remain underwater for extended periods. Had this design entered service in 1943 rather than 1945, it might have significantly extended the Battle of the Atlantic. However, rushed production created severe quality problems. Of 118 boats constructed, only 4 were fully combat-ready before war's end. Only 2 conducted combat patrols in April-May 1945, achieving no sinkings before Germany's surrender. The final U-boat patrol of the war demonstrated both the potential and the futility of German technological efforts. U-2511, the first Type 21 electro boat to see operational service, departed on April 30, 1945, commanded by corvette captain Adalbert Schnee, one of Germany's most experienced and successful U-boat commanders. Schnee's patrol demonstrated the Type 21's remarkable capabilities. On May 4, 1945, U-2511 detected a British cruiser task force and executed a perfect attack approach, reaching firing position undetected despite Allied radar coverage. The boat's superior underwater speed and silent running capabilities allowed it to close to attack range without detection. Schnee did not fire. Germany had already announced surrender negotiations. He surfaced and radioed his position on May 5, 1945, ending the U-boat war, not with violence, but with acceptance of defeat. In his post-war memoir, Schnee reflected on the bitter irony. "We proved that day what the Type 21 could have achieved had it entered service a year earlier. But such demonstrations were meaningless. The Allies had already won through industrial capacity and technological innovation deployed in 1942 and 1943. Our most advanced technology arrived when the war was already lost." The statistical summary of the Battle of the Atlantic confirms the decisive impact of the cavity magnetron's introduction in early 1943. From January through May 1943, during the period when first-generation ASV Mark III radar was being deployed, but before full operational coverage was achieved, U-boats sank 245 merchant ships, totaling approximately 1,289,000 tons. German losses during this period were 95 U-boat, including the catastrophic 41 to 43 boats lost in May alone. From June 1943 through May 1944, after centimeter radar equipped most Allied aircraft and ships operating in the Atlantic, merchant ship losses dropped to 185 ships, totaling approximately 819,000 tons, despite more U-boat being at sea. German losses during this period climbed to 237 U-boat. The exchange rate had reversed completely. In March 1943, at the peak of U-boat effectiveness, Germany sank 82 merchant ships, totaling 476,000 tons in the Atlantic, 120 ships worldwide, totaling 693,000 tons, while losing 12 U-boat. By summer 1943, after centimeter radar deployment became widespread, typical months saw fewer than 20 merchant ships sunk, while U-boat losses remained in double digits. The tonnage war had become unwinnable. The May 1943 convoy battles represented Germany's last chance to achieve strategic success in the Atlantic. The examination of the Rotterdam device in February 1943 confirmed what many German commanders suspected but hoped was not true. Allied technological capabilities had advanced far beyond German understanding, creating detection advantages that no amount of tactical skill or operational courage could overcome. The post-war examination of captured U-boat by Allied technical teams revealed desperate German attempts to adapt to Allied radar dominance. Some boats had been covered with experimental radar-absorbent materials, crude attempts at stealth that added weight, reduced performance, and provided negligible reduction in radar returns. The materials available to Germany in 1943 to 1944 were inadequate for effective radar absorption at centimeter wavelengths. Others carried inflatable decoy balloons designed to create false radar targets, devices that sometimes worked but could not be deployed when submerged or in heavy seas, limiting their tactical utility. Still others had been fitted with modified exhaust systems designed to minimize the radar signature of snorkel emissions, modifications that reduced diesel efficiency without eliminating radar detection. Each adaptation represented German engineering ingenuity applied to an essentially unsolvable problem. You cannot hide from electromagnetic radiation using mechanical solutions alone. The physics were unforgiving. Allied radar operated at wavelengths and power levels that made submarines visible regardless of weather, darkness, or evasive maneuvers. Only remaining completely submerged offered any protection. But battery technology in 1943 to 1944 could not support the extended underwater operations that would have been required to avoid detection entirely. German submarines were trapped by the limitations of their own technology. They were visible to enemies they could not see, hunted by weapons they could not effectively counter, and forced to operate in an electromagnetic environment where the Allies possessed complete dominance. The psychological documentation from German naval personnel provides perhaps the most compelling evidence of the cavity magnetron's war-winning impact. These were not defeated soldiers seeking excuses for failure. They were highly trained technical specialists who understood exactly what had gone wrong. Their testimony, recorded in interrogation reports, letters, and post-war memoirs, consistently emphasizes not tactical errors or operational failures, but fundamental technological obsolescence. They describe the helplessness of fighting enemies who possessed superior detection tools while German defenders remained effectively blind. They explained the fatalism that infected crews who knew detection was inevitable and survival was largely a matter of luck rather than skill. They documented the transformation from confident warriors to hunted prey, a psychological shift that occurred not through battlefield defeat, but through technological revelation. When Oberstleutnant Wilhelm Runge examined the Rotterdam device in February 1943, he performed an autopsy on German naval strategy. The copper block on his laboratory bench explained every mysterious U-boat loss, every impossible aircraft interception, every convoy battle where Allied forces seemed to know German positions before attacks developed. The cavity magneton revealed that Germany had been fighting the Battle of the Atlantic while deaf and blind to the electromagnetic spectrum that Allied forces exploited with devastating effectiveness. That revelation, more than any military defeat, shattered German confidence in technological superiority and strategic victory. It convinced German leadership that Allied technological capabilities exceeded German understanding, not just in radar, but potentially across multiple domains. If the British could develop revolutionary radar systems in secret while enduring years of strategic bombing, what other surprises might they deploy? This psychological effect, the destruction of confident certainty about German technological superiority, influenced German defensive preparations and diverted scarce resources to counter-weapon programs that arrived too late to affect the war's outcome. Intelligence assessments after Rotterdam became more cautious, always assuming the enemy possessed weapons beyond current German knowledge. By autumn 1943, production models of Allied centimetric radar equipped hundreds of aircraft and ships. The Type 271 naval radar, using cavity magneton technology, was installed on convoy escorts beginning in 1941, allowing them to detect surfaced submarines at ranges up to 20 kilometers and periscopes at approximately 900 yards. The system operated at 9.7 centimeter wavelength with 70 kilowatt peak power. The ASV Mark III airborne radar equipped RAF Coastal Command aircraft beginning in March 1943, enabling them to patrol thousands of square kilometers and detect U-boat regardless of visibility conditions. The American H-2X radar, an advanced version of H-2S, operating at 3 centimeter wavelength, provided bomber crews with navigation and targeting capabilities that rendered weather and night irrelevant to strategic bombing operations. Each system descended from the same revolutionary cavity magneton technology that Runge had examined in February 1943. The Rotterdam device had been the key that unlocked Allied electromagnetic dominance across the entire theater of operations. German attempts to counter this advantage consumed enormous resources for minimal operational effect. The Naxos radar warning receiver program diverted scientific talent and industrial capacity that might have been applied to offensive weapons or other defensive systems. U-boat construction shifted towards designs optimized for underwater operation, reducing production of conventional boats that might have been more effective in secondary theaters against less sophisticated opponents. Research programs explored exotic technologies, including underwater television systems, passive sonar arrays, and hydrogen peroxide propulsion for submarines. None of these reached operational status before war's end. Each represented German engineering excellence, chasing solutions to problems Allied technology had created and would overcome before German countermeasures could be widely deployed. The final accounting of the Battle of the Atlantic tells a story of industrial capacity and technological innovation, overwhelming tactical skill and operational courage. Germany commissioned approximately 1,181 U-boat during World War II. Of these, 785 were destroyed, with 648 lost to enemy action and the remainder scuttled, lost to accidents, or stricken from service. Only 156 survived to surrender in May 1945. Of the approximately 40,000 men who served in U-boat during the war, approximately 30,000 died, representing a 75% casualty rate. This was the highest casualty rate of any military service on either side of the conflict. These men fought with extraordinary courage and skill, but courage and skill could not overcome the fundamental technological disadvantage created by Allied radar superiority. The cavity magnetron, invented at Birmingham University in 1939 to 1940 and developed by GEC for practical military applications, represented one of the most significant technological breakthroughs of World War II. Its impact extended far beyond the immediate military applications. The microwave technology developed for military radar became the foundation for post-war communication systems, television broadcasting, satellite communications, and eventually the microwave ovens found in kitchens worldwide. The industrial expertise developed for magnetron production enabled the electronics revolution of the 1950s and 1960s. The Anglo-American technological cooperation, exemplified by the Tizard mission's sharing of magnetron technology in 1940, established patterns of scientific collaboration that continued through the Cold War and beyond. The decision to deploy revolutionary technology despite capture risks influenced military technology policy for decades. The cavity magnetron demonstrated that operational advantage from advanced technology outweighed the risks of enemy exploitation, provided that industrial capacity could produce the technology in quantities the enemy could not match. This principle guided Western military development through the jet age, the nuclear era, and into the information age. The willingness to field new capabilities quickly, accepting that adversaries would eventually copy or counter them, proved more effective than attempting to maintain perfect security while technology remained in laboratories. For the German U-boat force, the story ended in surrender and scuttling. On May 4, 1945, Grand Admiral Dönitz, briefly serving as German head of state after Hitler's suicide on April 30th, ordered all U-boat to cease offensive operations. On May 8, after Germany's unconditional surrender, Operation Deadlight began. All boats still at sea were ordered to surface, fly black flags, and proceed to designated Allied ports for surrender. Many commanders instead scuttled their boats, unwilling to surrender the vessels in which their comrades had died. The operational order Rainbow, echoing the scuttling of the German High Seas Fleet at Scapa Flow in 1919, resulted in over 200 U-boat being deliberately sunk by their own crews rather than surrendered to Allied forces. The men who had served in those boats, the 75% who died and the 25% who survived, had fought a campaign decided not by courage or tactics, but by physics and engineering. They had been defeated by electromagnetic radiation generated by a block of copper machined in British factories, installed in Allied aircraft and ships, deployed in quantities German industry could never match, given the material shortages, Allied bombing, and industrial capacity limitations facing the Third Reich. The examination of one captured radar set in February 1943 explained their doom, revealing the electromagnetic dimension of warfare in which Germany had been fighting blind, while the Allies possessed clear vision. The statistical evidence and the technological analysis both pointed to the same conclusion. The cavity magnetron had turned the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic more decisively than any tactical innovation or strategic decision. When Allied scientists celebrated the magnetron's impact after the war, they often quoted a remark attributed to American physicist Luis Alvarez, who worked on radar development at MIT's Radiation Laboratory. The cavity magnetron, Alvarez reportedly said, won the Battle of the Atlantic, the air battle over Germany, and ultimately the war. While this claim simplified complex historical causation involving many factors, the technical evidence provided strong support for the magnetron's decisive contribution. Without centimetric radar, Allied convoy losses would likely have remained at unsustainable levels throughout 1943 and into 1944. Without radar-equipped aircraft providing air coverage, U-boat would have continued operating with relative impunity in areas beyond range of shore-based air patrols. Without the detection advantage magnetron technology provided, D-Day preparations would have been vulnerable to submarine interdiction of the massive logistics buildup required for the Normandy invasion. The magnetron, derived from fundamental research in microwave physics at Birmingham University, manufactured in tens of thousands of units across American and British factories, deployed widely enough to provide persistent coverage of critical ocean areas, had created an electromagnetic advantage that tightened inexorably around German naval forces until they could no longer operate effectively. The examination in Telefunken headquarters in February 1943 was an autopsy, not a diagnosis. By the time German scientists understood what Allied technology had achieved, the strategic outcome was already determined. In the end, the story of the Rotterdam device transcends the specific narrative of radar technology or submarine warfare. It represents the decisive advantage that advanced technology provides when deployed at industrial scale against opponents who lack the scientific knowledge, industrial capacity, and material resources to match or counter it. It demonstrates the psychological impact of fighting enemies who possess capabilities you cannot match, transforming confident warriors into hunted prey through the revelation of technological inferiority. Most fundamentally, it illustrates how a block of copper 8 centimeters in diameter, precisely machined with 8 resonant cavities arranged around a central cathode, changed the course of history by making the invisible visible and the hidden exposed. The German admirals and scientists who examined that captured radar set understood perhaps more clearly than anyone else in the Third Reich that they were witnessing not just Allied technological ingenuity, but the instrument of German defeat. The mathematics were irrefutable, the physics unforgiving, the strategic implications inescapable. They returned from Berlin to their operational commands, carrying knowledge that their finest submarines and bravest crews could not overcome the electromagnetic advantage Allied science had created and Allied industry had deployed in war-winning quantities. They fought on because duty demanded it, and hope dies slowly. But they knew. The examination of a single device had shown them the future.